Today we're going to be talking about travel, and for both domestically and internationally for registrants, but also their family members, because gosh gee whiz, families like to travel together. And you know, there might be one person in the family who has restrictions, the other doesn't, but it does affect everybody in the family. So my name is Janice Bellucci, and I'm a lawyer, and I am also Executive Director of the Alliance for Constitutional Sex Offense Laws. To my left, your right, is
Chance Oberstein. I'm the president of the organization. I'm also an attorney.
And to my right,
Paul Rigney. I'm the Executive Director of Registrant Travel Action Group, trying to work with some of the issues of international travel.
so we are here today again to talk about domestic travel and also international travel. Okay, so why should you care about domestic travel? And what are the rules? The fact is that unfortunately, if your guess is wrong, you can end up in prison. So that should get your attention. And it would be a failure to register. And if your underlying offense was a felony, it will be a felony, at least in California. So this is not something that you want to guess at. Possible imprisonment, really, honest to God, is up to 10 years in prison. So if you think it's worth it to go to fill in the blank, let's just say Las Vegas for a week, is it really worth 10 years in prison? Because that's what could happen. Okay, and it's a strict liability offense, so ignorance of the law is not an excuse. You're telling the cops in Las Vegas, wow, gee whiz, I didn't know I could only stay here for 48 hours without registering. Say, we don't care. Slap the handcuffs on you and you're off to jail and then prison. Okay, so one of the basic questions is, what is travel, right? So a gentleman and I were discussing this even prior to the panel beginning, and believe it or not, there is some disagreement about what travel is. So when people ask me this question, and I'm telling you, it's a visit, okay, a visit. So you're not planning to live there, okay, I'm not moving to Iowa to live there the rest of my days. I'm going to go visit Iowa because my aunt and uncle live in Iowa, or I like the cheese in Wisconsin, or whatever it is. You're planning a visit. Because if you're planning to live there, the rules are different, and we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is if you're planning to go visit a location. Okay, also the thing about going to college there, believe it or not, that also triggers it. Different rules. If you're going to go there to go to college, maybe part-time, I don't know, depends on the state. By the way, every state has different rules and regulations. And remember, you're responsible for knowing what they are, not them. And how about work? This can happen too. You work for a big company, the company wants to send you out of state for an assignment. It doesn't make any difference. You are now working there and not visiting. And that could trigger a whole different set of requirements. We're not talking about these things, we're talking about visiting. Okay, so how much time can you spend somewhere without registering? And honest to God, it depends. A lawyer's favorite answer. Now, the interesting thing, maybe it's a little easier with this because there actually are laws. So in Rhode Island, it's 24 hours. Fortunately, Rhode Island is a small state. Okay, what I mean by that is you can spend the night across the border from Rhode Island, go visit Rhode Island during the day, and go stay in one of those other states nearby. Okay, but honest to God, 24 hours in Rhode Island trips the requirement to register as a sex offender in Rhode Island. Other places, Nevada I just mentioned, a lot of people, I want to go to Las Vegas. I want to go gamble, I want to go see a show, I want to go to a trade show, whatever it is. It doesn't make any difference why you're going to Las Vegas. The fact is, if you're there for 48 hours or more, you have to register there. And I understand they don't make it fast. It's not a quick registration process. So you may spend 4 hours of your time in Las Vegas registering as a sex offender in their system.
And also remember this, not to mix things up, but when we talk about travel, we're addressing domestic travel as opposed to foreign travel.
Right now.
And there are different forms of travel. Travel within your state, travel beyond your state boundaries, and travel outside the boundaries of the country. Right now, we're just talking about traveling across state lines.
Okay, California, guess where you are right now? You got 5 days. Okay, Florida's the same, Hawaii's the same. But there's a lot of in-betweens and even greater thans. So let me tell you a little bit about Florida. Florida once you register in the state of Florida, you'll never get off their registry. It doesn't make any difference. People, it's like, I'm going to go with the family, spend the week at Disney with the family. You go in, you register, they will never take you off their registry. Florida doesn't even take dead people off their registry. I'm serious. California does. If you can get a death certificate in California, you can get off the registry. But in Florida, no.
Maybe.
No.
Maybe.
No, they say no. So we have people fighting it in Florida. This is how I know. People in Florida are fighting it right now, saying, my God, my relative died X number of days, months, years ago. Please take them off the registry. And Florida says, no, that's not our policy. We don't take people off our registry, even if they're dead. So let's see, if being on the registry is to protect somebody, whether it's a child or an adult, how does a dead person pose a risk?
Well, I know the justification.
Oh, okay.
Because Florida says that you have to monitor those who pose a threat to the community. And even someone who is dead,
Yeah.
in their view, can pose a threat to the community.
I can just imagine that arm coming up on with a sticker. Yeah, so anyway, in addition to...
Zombie.
Yeah, the
Well,
zombie.
the zombie complex, eh?
Okay, we have a question here.
Presumably, if you get your cure bill and state the other bills, people are actually going to be getting off the registry. What happens if someone who was a sex offender is off the registry, goes to a state where they would be on the registry in that state? Does anyone know what the...
Let me answer that, Janice.
Chance would love to answer your question.
I
Does
will
it
answer.
depend?
I will answer that for you because it was tried here in California and Nevada. And what happened was the person here got off the registry, okay, and was living perfectly fine, non-registering in California. They decided to retire in Nevada. In Nevada, their offense is on their registry. Nevada said, we're not going to let California determine for us who's a threat to our community. And therefore, if you're going to live here, you've got to register here. Now, let me say this. That's for most generic sex crimes. If you were convicted of a crime, let's just say sex with a minor, simple crime, 16-year-old, okay? In California, it's 18 or under, but let's just take most jurisdictions, okay? The 16-year-old rule. In Nevada, I believe it's 16. So if you were convicted in California and it's 18 and you moved to Nevada, that's a gray area query whether you would have to register in Nevada because it's not a crime if the alleged victim in your particular case was 17 or 18. So, but the general answer is that if it's a crime there and it causes you to register on the registry, because you're off in this state doesn't necessarily preclude them requiring you to register in their state.
And wait, folks, we're getting off the track. We're talking about visiting, okay? So all of a sudden the discussion is about where you live. You have a question about travel?
I do,
Excellent.
and it's about domestic travel.
Great.
So, and I understand for international travel, there's notification requirements. And I understand for living requirements, when you change your residence, in some jurisdictions here in California, including Los Angeles, not only do you have to re-register where your new residence is, but you have to out-register from where you're currently. So if you're going to visit somewhere where it's going to trigger you to have to register in that state, you're only there for 2 days or whatever, will you have to then register out or notify LA or whatever jurisdiction you're living in that you're going there?
I'd say the general rule is not, but look at the document that you sign when you register annually. There should be a statement there that says whether or not you have to. I know it says, like, if I'm moving from San Jose to San Diego, then I have to tell people in San Jose that I'm moving to San Diego. But in general, you don't have to tell people if you're just going on a vacation. But be careful. I'm not talking about anybody on parole or probation. You have different rules. Those are conditions. Okay. Okay, so one other limitation I want to emphasize here is that in some states, you can't actually visit for more than, for example, 30 days in a year. So let's just say you go to Hawaii because you really like Hawaii, but every time you go to Hawaii, it's for 5 days. But by the 6th time you're there, maybe it's the 7th time, you just exceeded 30 days. That's another one of their requirements. All the information about these states is in fact on our website, okay? There's a legal tab and there's a whole chart. And I will tell you, you have to be extremely careful because I do have a client who wanted to go to Yellowstone. I didn't realize Yellowstone was in several states. So I had to figure out where the hotel was that he was staying in, and then what county in that state, and then track it down from there. And you need to do this ahead of time. Don't wait till you get there, okay? Because, oh, well, we're closed for this reason on this day, and we have this, you know, usually the hours are 10 to 3, but except on alternate Saturdays or whatever it is. You have to do this, plan this ahead of time. You need to include that in your schedule. Because again, the fact that your family wanted to go horseback riding doesn't make any difference, right? And they wanted you to be there, it's not worth it. Okay, 10 years in prison, tell your family it's not worth it. Okay, it's not worth it to me, it's not worth it to you, to not be with your family for 10 years. Yes, Julia?
To the best of your knowledge, within California, are there any restrictions as far as visiting, time limit,
Okay?
without moving or relocating, just visiting?
Yes and no. Okay, so the general rule is this. If you're not on parole or if you're not on probation, you can go visit anywhere that you want to. Then the question is, when does that visit become a residence? And honest to God, there are cases all over the map in this. It's really terrible. So there are cases, it's where you, quote, regularly reside. There are cases out there that say even if you don't spend the night there, you might reside there. So I say that to you because I just want you to know the law is unclear, okay? It's kind of, and I actually have a client right now who has been charged, and I'm trying to not get him convicted for regularly residing at his girlfriend's house. All of his possessions are at his parents' house. He'd go visit his girlfriend a couple times a week, right? And they want to charge him with failure to register. He was properly registered at his parents' house, where all of his possessions are. According to him, he didn't have any clothes at her house. He didn't, you know, have his barbells or anything. All he did was he would spend the night with his girlfriend. And so right now, he's been charged with failure to register. Yes, sir.
Sure, sorry, real quick, because you mentioned something about 10 years. Now, like, and in the state of California, it's 2 years, and now you don't even go to prison, you go back to just county. But, so when you say 10 years, does this become a federal crime because you're crossing state lines?
It depends on the state. In Texas, it can be up to 10 years, for example.
In California, it can be up to 10 years in state court. Federal, it's 10 years, up to 10 years as well. When we start talking about international travel. Both, I looked it up. Okay, let's go. So let's talk about a little bit more about domestic travel and when you're going to visit other states. We are not a SORNA compliant state in California, but there's 17 states that are out there that are SORNA compliant. Okay, that means the federal law applies there. You have to register within 3 days. If you go, even if you go visit a SORNA compliant state.
So the bottom line is that if you're going to travel, before you go, check the state or the place you're going to go to and know what the requirements are. And if you can possibly avoid registering in that jurisdiction, do so. Because you don't want to register anywhere else but in the state you actually reside, which is California. Why? Because when it comes to post-conviction relief and it's time to clean this thing up, you could have registered in Florida, which means you're going to be on there for life and you're going to be a registrant for life. So think before you do. If you don't know, inquire. There's plenty of attorneys out there to talk to, and check. Our website, I believe we cite state laws, and then you can go and see what the current update is in any particular state by running a search on your computer.
But the other thing I often do too is I go to the ACSOL website of the state. And usually if you do that, let's just say you're going to go visit Georgia, go to the Georgia ACSOL website, okay, and see what you can see on there. Usually somewhere they'll tell you what part of their government actually deals with this, and then you can start tracking down a phone number. And so for my client who went to Yellowstone, I can't remember what state it ended up being, but anyway, you know, to the state and then down to the county. It was a good geography lesson. Yes, sir.
I just got to piggyback on this because my mom lives in Hawaii and I go to see her. And the last time I was there was 10 goddamn days. Now they're down to 5. So it's like, oh, she's almost walking dropped into a felony, what fund? So I guess that's the importance of it, it's a little free.
Now, if you heard buyer beware, this is traveler beware. Yes, sir.
What about a 7-day Hawaii cruise?
Are you in Hawaii the whole time?
No.
On a
On a
minute?
ship,
Huh?
island on the ship?
Folks, I don't know the answer to that question, and I probably think nobody does. I don't know of any cases. Part of this, you have to decide for yourselves what amount of risk you're willing to take. Whether it's domestic travel or it's international travel. What level of risk are you comfortable taking? You can, people have like, oh, I went to Las Vegas for a week, nothing happened. I'm really happy for you. Do you jump out of airplanes without parachutes too? I mean, come on. It's up to you what you do. It's up to you the level of risk that you take. But the fact is, you're betting with your own life and your own freedom. I mean, just think of it. Okay, you go to Las Vegas, and you get airfare, you get your round trip flight, there's a week apart right here. You go get a hotel reservation for a week, right? The third day that you're there, you get hit by a car and they take you to the hospital. Oh, and they're like, huh, what do you know? You're on the sex offender registry. Well, let me check. When did you get here? Oh, and your return flight is when? You've just gotten busted for failure to register, right there. And innocence on your part. You know, things happen in Las Vegas that don't stay in Las Vegas, including getting hit with a car or being shot.
Here's one. You're in Florida, and you're driving along, and everything's just fine. You're gonna rent a car. You're not worried, because after all, you're not driving your car. And you know what? You've driven into Florida, so you're not worried about anybody checking you out, airline-wise or anywhere else. And you run a red light, and the police pull you over, and then they run your name. And then they start to ask you, well, how long have you been in Florida? And so on and so forth. This is where the trouble starts. And that's why I say, know what you're doing before you get there. It's always a good idea.
Have a plan. Oh, right
I
there.
just want to add, so there are some reports of cruise lines that will actually check and refuse you boarding.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just tell you, Royal Caribbean is one of those cruise lines that will not let people on the registry there. This is how I found out about it. I got a phone call saying my wife and I just got an email from the cruise line telling us that they're not going to let me board the vessel. And let's see, we bought plane tickets round trip. We've done this, that, and the other excursions. That, and they said, oh yeah, and they said we weren't going to pay. They're not going to reimburse our money either. And so I said, I don't think so. So I was, and fortunately, they put it in writing. The reason why, because you got to prove it's the reason why too, right? So fortunately, I got him his money back, every penny of it, but he didn't ever board that cruise ship. So be very careful. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking to the cruise thing, I had a guy who wanted to take a cruise up to Alaska. He's going, it docks in Vancouver, Canada, and even though he has to stay on the boat, I told him you better check with Canada, and they won't let him go on the thing. They won't, you cannot be, so this whole idea of cruising around, I think is really problematic because Canada won't take anybody.
Sure.
So he
Okay.
ended up canceling the trip in advance, but
Yeah.
at least he
The
had.
cruise lines is almost a completely different subject. We can talk about it.
Yeah, we're trying to finish domestic travel. Does anybody have a domestic travel question?
So if I have a motorhome
Yeah.
and I'm retiring, I'm going to travel around the United States.
Yes.
Each state that I go into, I'm going to stay there for more than 3 to 5 days.
Depend.
No, if you're going to stay
How
there
about
at all.
24 hours?
Right,
Yeah. Look, folks, none of this is fair. None of it is logical. It's just what the law says. You assume the risk. I understand we are Americans. We want to get in our motorhomes. We want to travel across the country however we feel like doing it. And if you do that, you're facing a risk. So what we're urging you to do is plan your trip, okay? Plan your trip. Where am I going to be? Which states? And you might figure out, well, if I just take a slightly southern route, then I won't be in trouble. Or maybe you want to avoid the south and go to the northern route, but try to not go through Nevada. Yes, sir.
Okay, say I go to Nevada for work,
Yes.
and within the 48 hours, I register because I have to be there more than 48 hours.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to stay on the registry for everything.
None in Nevada, no.
So how long am I going to
Yeah,
stay?
because I've done that. I went to Nevada for 3 days, registered in Las Vegas, and I was there, popped up on the internet, and then it came off.
For how long?
And actually, I was there for 3 days.
No,
Like, how long were
were
you on there, making something?
Just the time, the days I was there, in the hotel I listed.
And wait a minute, what Paul just said is an anecdote. It's one person's experience.
Right.
It's not necessarily what the law says.
Okay, but if
Marty.
I'm there, let's say they put me on there for like 3 or 4 years or something.
Okay, just,
Then I can go to lots of, you know,
Here-
Well, we're speculating.
here's the point. Here's the point. Anybody who ever goes to Nevada, now that's just a pinhead state. That's a little tiny place, okay? Anybody who goes there, it just takes 30 minutes to come back to the state line, get a cup of
Yeah.
coffee or a Starbucks with your credit card, and then go back in.
Yeah.
And guess what? It resets the clock.
Right.
So nobody, ever should register in the state of
To
Nevada.
come here, I flew into Vegas, stayed 2 days at a hotel, actually only 1 day. I drove here and I'm here for 4 days. And then I'm gonna go back to Vegas for 1 day and fly back. And then-
Okay, Marty's been waiting, please.
Yeah, I don't know if this applies to any states, but if you go to another state and you register there and then you come back to California, are there any states that make it mandatory that you still follow the registration procedures a year later, or do they just let it go?
I don't know of any other state that requires you to do that, not just while you're visiting. Sir, you have a question back there?
Do they search retroactively for travel if they find you violated something?
You know what, I think that they wouldn't do it unless they had a reason to do it.
And that's the catch though, is if you're being investigated for something else, let's just say, they can go to your Facebook, they can look at airline tickets, they can look at credit card stuff, and they might look to see, well, maybe we can get on something else if you do travel. So that's what happens with the digital world we live in. If you do break the law, I know a guy went to New York. Well, I went to New York for 3 months, he lives in California, and nothing happened. Well, there's a record of it, and now he hopes he doesn't have any of the problems with the law.
And remember, ex post facto anything is okay according to our U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, so let's talk about the simple topic of international travel in just a minute.
Yeah, one
Mike.
last question about Nevada.
Nevada.
I wanted to know, since it's just anecdotally, what if you did register, how would you ever find out if you are off the register in Nevada? I was there for one visit.
Just go look on the Megastar website.
You can do that for Nevada?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
for any state. Yes, sir.
Two things. I go to Nevada all the time. I've had to register there, but it is, if you're only there for a few days, they call it temporary registration. They do take you off. It is not lifetime. Normally, if you're there for 4 days, you're in their system temporarily for 4 days. They don't, usually put you on the website unless you're there for a larger amount of time than 3 to 5 days. But also just as important, because I travel for business every month, even looking at the state's requirements and their websites is great, or calling their registration hotline or numbers on their websites, but every county within every state has different rules. So Florida's 5 days, but if you're going to Orlando, that county is 3 days. And you have to go there, you have to get a license to go to the DMV, like there's a whole other process. So as important as the states are, every single county has a different set of rules. So don't just call the state, go there, like go to Texas is 5 days, but Austin or Dallas is a different amount. So you have to call the local PD and ask what, in that county, and ask what their restrictions and requirements are, because you can go there and say, like, look on your state website, it says 5 days, and I'm only here for 3 or 4, and they're like, well, that's not our county's, and they can bust you that way. So you have to call county by county, not state by state. Places like Nashville, they charge you $200 for the pleasure of registering in their county if you're there for more than 72 hours, but they don't count weekends. So if you're there on Friday and they close at 5 and you're gone by Sunday night, they don't count it. So you have to know county by county and call the local PD to find out what their rules are.
So thank you for sharing that anecdote with us. Now let's talk about international travel.
Isn't it illegal to access the Megan's Law website?
If you're a California registrant, it's illegal for you to look at the California registry.
But other states, okay?
Other states are okay. By the way, somebody else can do it on your behalf. If people call me and it's the first time I've actually talked to them, I will, as I'm talking to them, if I'm at my computer, which is most of the time, I will look them up on the Megansol website because I want them to know if their profile is correct or incorrect. Most profiles today are correct in that they include the year of conviction and the year of release, but we had to sue the California Department of Justice for that to happen. So, and somebody else can actually print out your profile off the Megansol website and hand it to you, and that's okay too. The thing that is supposed to prevent, believe it or not, the reason given for you not to go to the Megansol website is they don't want you looking up other people who are in the registry and then ganging up against them, I guess. Anyway, yes, sir.
Yeah, the fact that different counties have different rules, is that true in California?
No. No, in California, it's their state law, and again, visiting anywhere you can visit, because you have to watch out for those 5 days. The other stuff that we were talking about, when does it become a residence? It depends. But the fact is, one important fact I want you to know, there are no presence restrictions, so, unless you're on parole, okay? But if you're not on parole, you can visit any place in California you want to. You can go to the beach, you can go to the swimming pool, you can go to the public library, you can go all these places, and it hasn't always been that way. If you're on parole, the only difference is you have to ask your parole officer first before you go to a park or to a school, okay? Oh, I just brought up schools, didn't I? We're not going to talk about visiting schools, but in general, so you can go to these places, because people really were very frightened at one point in time, going, wow, if I drive from point A to point B, I might want to stop and get some gas, or use the restroom, or get a soft drink, whatever these things are. I'm afraid to pull over anywhere, because I might go to a place that has a McDonald's that has a playground in it, and I can't go those places. We don't have to worry about those anymore, again, unless you're on parole. Okay, so presence restrictions, it's gotten easier really to travel inside the state of California. It really has. So what we're talking about mostly is traveling out of the state of California or into the state of California from other states. Okay, so I really would like to move on to international because this is more complex, of course, than domestic travel. So there's something called the International Megan's Law that got passed by Congress and signed into law by the President in February of 2016. So we're talking about, what, a year and a quarter ago. We were watching this. And there's a congressman from New Jersey, his name is Chris Smith, and he represents the district in which Megan Kanka and her family lived. I guess her family still lives there. So that's his claim to fame, I guess. So, he's got Megan's Law passed, and he's milking that baby for everything it's got. And what I mean by that is every year for 10 years, he would introduce something called International Megan's Law. And it would pass the House of Representatives, and the Senate always yawned. They wouldn't do anything with it. And that has to pass both houses to become law. But what happened in December of 2015 is the Senate said, here you go, and let's up the ante on this one. So not only Chris Smith's bill was always about notification. That was it. If you're going to travel to another foreign country and your offense involved a minor, then we're going to send a notice about you to the foreign country. But what the Senate did was they added a second provision, and that has to do with putting a unique identifier on your passport. Okay? So there's two prongs to International Megan's Law. And, talk about, really folks, it doesn't make any difference if they're Republicans or they're Democrats. When it comes to our topic, they're blind and stupid. So here was President Obama, oh yeah, sure, I'll sign this. He signed it into law, right? And so now we have to deal with it. And by the way, this for sure, up to 10 years in prison if you guess wrong on this one. Okay, so the notification part is that our government is going to send a notice to the government that you're traveling to, right? If your offense involved a minor, and maybe whether or not you're required to register currently. I put it that way because the way the law is written, it says they can send notices about anybody who's ever been convicted of an offense involving a minor. And as Chance said, what even is the definition of a minor? So if you have sex with a 16-year-old in California, that's minor. If you have sex with what state is it, Ohio or something, 16-year-old is fine. and I'm just using Ohio as an example, I don't even know if that's true. So, but the fact is that even if even if you're not required to register, the federal government has the authority to send a notice to a foreign country that you're coming to visit. Now, when we sued the federal government because of this, the federal government said in court, oh, even though we have that authority, we would never exercise that authority. It's like, really? You've already done it twice. Oh, well, that was a mistake. We make mistakes.
Well, they said it was a mistake, but I think that their justification for doing this and the reason it's in the law is because they look for patterns of travel. And if they see someone who formally registered, now doesn't register, is going to countries where there's, let's just say, sex trafficking, especially with children, I think that allows them to send a notice ahead. And I think that's kind of why they hold that in reserve.
Perhaps.
On this, I actually talked with the staffer who wrote the most current law. We've had a communication, and my organization, eventually I want to go and meet with her with some legal help. But before we get that, she stated the intent was exactly what Chance said, was they want to look at patterns. And the Angel Watch program was supposed to be intelligence driven. But she emphasized what they have is one guy that sits and looks at the manifest of travel and also marshal services. And what they're doing, what he's doing now, or she, when they're on duty, is simply sending their alert without looking at any travel characteristics at all, which is completely separate from the original intent of the bill. So that's the biggest problem, is a resource problem. And they are making a mistake of sending notices for people who are adult, but they're not supposed to. The law states that they're not supposed to send it for people with convictions for adult.
So where the victim is an adult?
Right.
Yeah.
But they still make that mistake on occasion.
Yeah, and guess what? You have no notice. So that's it, really, folks. You will not know if they send a notice to another country about you. You won't know until you get there, right? And then you get escorted off the plane. You get sent to somewhere that doesn't have windows and may not have food or water. Hopefully they have a bathroom. And you sit there in this limbo, because when you're in an airport, you're not in a nation, by the way. This, like, it's a no place, right? There are no constitutional rights in airports. So you're there, and you don't know what's going to happen, except that we'll tell you what's going to happen. They will send you back to our country, and you don't get your money back. Now, if you're traveling with somebody, they don't know where you are, because your electronics also get taken away from you. So they don't know where you are, they don't know when and if they're ever going to see you again. So really, do you really want to take this risk? And we'll tell you that there are some countries that ignore the notices sent to them by our government. And there's 26 nations in Europe, for example, and Paul knows some other ones. Did you have a question over here? Yes, sir.
So I've had my passport for a few years. It's not up till 5 more years. It'll show up on that now?
No.
No.
No. So
I'll have new passports.
I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to talk about the passport stuff in just a minute. You can wait. Let's just talk about the notification part. So if I go to this next slide, you will see here about some of the countries. So when I say entry denied, these are just some of the countries, a few of them. Okay, there are many more. And so this last bullet point here about the RTAG website, and Paul is here representing RTAG. He has a matrix on there. And again, this is based upon anecdote and not law. Okay, but please do not try to fly to Mexico. Okay, I get so many sad calls about that. And I'm like, wow, if only you had read our website, you would know not to try to go to Mexico. I'm talking about flying into Mexico. Okay, I have a client who travels to Mexico on a regular basis by car, and he's able to do that. Sometimes they send him to secondary screening coming back into the U.S., but he's never actually been denied entry into Mexico. He actually lives there.
You know,
Yes?
I know of many cases where they've driven into Mexico and then once they're in there, fly within Mexico.
Yes, I do.
Yes, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And have they had issues or?
So we'll share some anecdotes.
Sure. Here, let's talk about cars. The primary way that people are getting on the database, we believe in Mexico, is they fly. When they fly, the manifest is released to our Border Patrol, who will call it for people on the blacklist, things like that. And once they see you're a registrant, they send that information to ICE, which sends it to the Angel Watch office. who will then make a decision whether to send it to the other country. The other way is the 21-day notice and the Marshal Service. But let's talk about the Angel Watch Service. So you fly to Mexico, you fly to Cancun. This one person flew to Cancun, they got kicked out. At that moment, within the Mexican immigration system, he's flagged as a registrant. He goes across Mexico a few months later in his car, has no problem. He goes to get insurance within Mexico. At the place he goes to get insurance, they scan his passport and they actually escorted him 50 miles by armored vehicle back across the border. So he got kicked out. So now what he does, this is just him speaking, is he will go and not have his passport scanned. So the biggest risk in Mexico is do they have your information in their system, and will your passport get scanned? So what people do, and I know one person, several people have done it successfully. They've gone into Mexico, successfully gone to Reynosa or wherever, flown domestically to go where they want, and they only need an ID, and since they're not going through customs, their passport will not be scanned. And that's the key, where you go through customs. So you can go on a cruise, go to Cancun, and get off the boat, go see the pyramids, come back, which I've done, and not have a problem because your passport is not being scanned.
Yes, sir.
What about though, you're supposed to in Mexico to cross the border get a tourist visa?
And that's the key. Now, you take a risk. If you've never been kicked out of the country before, they may not have your data. We suspect Mexico has a thing called the Guardian Angel program, and it goes toe-to-toe with the Angel Watch program. We think that our government's given them our entire database, but there are people that go across, get the FM1 visa, and they don't have a problem. But if you've flown into the country, and there are people that go get the FM1 visa after crossing over, and they get kicked out.
Yes, sir.
Because I got sent back, so I'm most likely in the system there.
Exactly. Where were you sent back from?
Mexico City.
You flew in?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so you're probably in the system.
Right, so I never wanted to.
I know a person right now who went across, he's in Mexico City right now. He went by bus from the border city into Mexico City.
Yes, sir.
I have a house in Mexico. I was down there many times a year. But now, if I go to Mexico, don't I legally have to file a 21-day notice
We're
here?
going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so, and still on the notification part here, is how do they even find out you're going to travel internationally, right? Well, it can be your disclosure, that 21 days notice you just mentioned. It can be information sent by local law enforcement to the federal government, or people scanning the international flight manifest.
Right.
Okay, so those are 3 different ways. The question about whether or not you have to give at least 21 days notice is, it depends. Chance and I like to argue about this all the time, and we're just when we're bored, right, we just start talking about it, but that's a joke. Anyway, the fact is, though, that we don't agree.
What is the 21-day notice, I'm sorry?
Okay, so maybe the International Migrants Law requires anybody traveling internationally to give local law enforcement at least 21 days notice that they're traveling outside the country. Maybe. In California, our California Department of Justice doesn't even know whether or not that's required. And so, but they came up with a form just in case that you can fill out and take to local law enforcement. Remember earlier I talked about risk? How much risk are you willing to assume? It's up to you.
Now, speaking of those, this is why there's an area of conflict, and I understand what Janice is talking about. That form came after a conversation that I had with the person in charge of that unit at the DOJ. The reason that form came along was because there was an issue as to whether or not, if a person traveled from California, they were subject to SORNA. Now, we know California is not a SORNA state, but this IML law may have imposed SORNA restrictions on us. I want someone in this room, anybody, raise your hand if you want to be the first test case for the SORNA.
10 years in prison, anybody?
Okay, all right, well, okay. So here was my discussion with the DOJ. How can a person who's a registrant in the state of California protect themselves from federal prosecution? And so DOJ was nice enough to come up with a form. Now this is what I understand about that. You fill out the form, you give 21 days notice.
At least.
you give it to the agency that you register at, and they stick it in your file or throw it away. They don't share it with the feds. You get a copy of that. You stick the copy in your wallet or your purse, and that way when you come back through secondary and the feds start to look for and sort out who they're going to use for their first test case, like the case in Kansas, the Nichols case, you're not the candidate. And that's the whole theory behind it.
Wait a minute, if you're gonna take a form to local law enforcement, I always recommend take 2 copies, okay? You get 1 copy, date, time stamped by them, and you keep it. You don't care what they do with their copy. Sometimes they will throw it in the trash. What is this? I've never seen this before. Why are you giving this to me? Don't even argue with them, just say, I'm giving it to you, now would you date, time stamp mine? Because it's proof that you actually took it in there. Because otherwise you don't have proof. Yes, sir.
I live in Missouri, and they do notify the feds. Now, there is a green Interpol notice.
About you?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Sorry.
what is notifying the foreign government? Is it the green
Well, let me talk
notice?
about that real quick. There's 2 ways that the federal government knows that you're traveling. Actually, 3 ways. One is you give 21-day notice. Your state either does or does not give it to the Marshal Service, who now has it to give to the Angel Watch Office. Or they can give it directly to Interpol. The other way is you go in and make your airline reservation. That's called a name record. That's available to the Border Patrol, who can give it to the Angel Watch Office. The main way is you board a ship or an airline, and the manifest, the airline passenger information system, is released to Customs and Border Protection, whose job it is to cull it and then send out the information to the Angel Watch Office. Once that architecture is completed, then either the U.S. Interpol office in D.C. or the Angel Watch Office will send it to the other country. How do they do that? Angel Watch will send it to either an ICE agent at the embassy, who will notify local immigration, or he'll give it to Interpol, who will notify through Interpol with a green notice, or to just a travel alert to immigration in that country. Or the Marshal Service will give it to Interpol or directly to immigration via email or fax. So those are different ways. So one person was trying to time it to go less than 21 days by making it like 3 days, and he was going to fly to Mexico. I said, look, there's no reason not to do the 21 days, because unless you cross the border by foot. Because once you book your flight or you get on your flight, the government's going to know that you're traveling internationally. So there at least is no reason not to tell the government. And real quick, what I want to say on the 21-day thing is, I contacted Homeland Defense. I got a copy of a document internally which Homeland Defense uses to train ICE on this. And when it came to the 21 days, or what they're supposed to do to notify your local agency, the government told their agents to tell us that they cannot give legal advice, that we are supposed to abide by the requirements of a local agency or get a lawyer. So on the 21-day notice, I don't think they understand how they're going to enforce that, or if they will. But I'll tell you one thing, they will enforce the notification because they're going to know.
Okay, we got a question in the back.
What if your travel date is less than 21 days in the future? There is no exception for.
Well, that's the thing. The original version of the bill stated, if for emergencies or other work.
There's no such language.
Yeah, there was originally, there is no such language now, so we don't know. We don't know. I don't know.
They say it does not
Yeah.
criminalize travel, but it does.
Yeah, so we don't have an answer.
One of the plaintiffs in our lawsuit challenging the International Migrants Law is a cargo pilot. He literally goes to work not knowing what country he's going to fly to, literally, right? And so he cannot give 21 days notice and maintain his job. And he happens to be from Texas.
Yeah,
so these things happen, folks. These things happen, and the current law doesn't make those accommodations. So let's go to the second part of IML, because if notification wasn't bad enough, let's talk about your passports, right? And what the law says is that the State Department is required to add a, quote, unique identifier to the passports of anybody ever convicted of an offense involving a minor. and is currently required to register. So this one's clear, that you have to be currently required to register. So, hey, in some of those states where people automatically get off the registry, it wouldn't make any difference here. You're not going to get this identifier if they do it correctly. Big if. Okay, so there's another part of it that says, and they may, the State Department may or may not revoke an existing passport. Now, just because I worked for the federal government for 10 years, and I hope you want to hold that against me, the fact is that I know that they don't usually move very quickly, okay? So my best guess is they're going to do what they have to do first, which is to add this to new passports, okay? Then if they get around to it, they may or may not revoke passports, because the law doesn't say that they have to do that. So I have been giving advice for quite some time. If you don't have a passport, go get a passport now. If you do have a passport and you can renew it now. Because, again, this question is maybe, maybe not, will they revoke an existing passport? And let's just say you get a passport, it's usually been good for 10 years, right? And they're not going to add this, quote, unique identifier to it. So as long as you don't have a unique identifier, the better off you are. Now, wonder what a unique identifier looks like. We have no clue. Okay, when I argued in the case, just a moment, sir, in federal court, I said, look, it doesn't make any difference what the identifier looks like. And I literally said, it could be a happy face or it could be a swastika. It doesn't make any difference what it looks like, right? Because it brands you. There's going to be stigma attached to this. Oh, no. The judge, by the way, said, she was testifying herself in part of this case, and she's like, oh, well, you know, you only have to show a passport once when you enter a new country. And I'm thinking to myself, this woman's never traveled outside the country. It's obvious, right? Because when you go, you're giving it to the hotel, you want to exchange money, you know, sometimes you go to a museum, you got to show your passport. So this is utter nonsense. Sir, you had a question?
Did anybody read the story in our website about the chip? Well, the guy, his passport had a chip in it already?
All of our passports have chips in them already. I don't know that it identifies anybody as a registrant. It shouldn't, because folks, before this part of the law gets implemented, they're required by law to issue a regulation. There has not been a regulation about the passport identifier. Trust me, we look for it every single day. Yes, ma'am?
So basically what it comes down to is they will not add a unique identifier to someone who is off the registry, but they may yet notify the country.
They might send
Correct.
a notice. Yes, very good.
For those convicted minor offenses against minors.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you might be offended by this. I will tell you that I was very offended by this. And it's not even going to be added to my passport. But think about it. If you look at this from a historical perspective, there's only 2 countries that have ever added a unique identifier to passports, one of them being Nazi Germany to Jews, and the other one was Communist Russia to Jews. So really, folks, we want to join that club? I don't think so. I really don't. And so the fact that the federal judge in our case couldn't see this, it was just baffling. No, never mind. I won't bash her too much anymore.
So if I
Yes?
renew my passport now, it'll be for 10 years, and I won't have that identifier on it?
I'm not saying that. Your new passport won't have it on there, but if you do it quickly. But the fact is that they could revoke it later. So you may not get it for the whole 10 years, but you would get it for some period of time. Sir, the second row back there. Yes, sir.
Just real quick. So I know you were talking about the way to get around this is you drive across state.
Well, I don't want to recommend anything. I'm just saying
no,
what people have.
My assumption then is once this unique identifier is in place, that will no longer be
Well, let me talk about the unique identifier. The best assessment we have from the State Department, from the guy he claimed to be part of making the decision is, the idea is to put a stamp or statement at the very last page of your passport. I never knew this was here. I think I talked to you. We talked about it. It's an endorsement, and it's gonna. He didn't say it's gonna say sex offender. It probably will though. It said this person is a covered individual under international banking law, blah blah blah. And that's all it's going to be on the very, very last page, which could be good.
Depending whether they look at it or not.
Right.
They're going to look at it. okay? Because on the front of your passport it says go to the endorsement page. So they're gonna look at it. The reason they're doing the identifier is to close all the loopholes that we've been using all these years to avoid notification. That's why they're doing the identifier.
Right. So you go to one country like you go to France, which we have no problems, and then you try to fly to Thailand. Well, a notice won't be sent because you're not in, the manifest isn't released to the U.S. federal government, but when you get to Thailand, it's going to be there. Now, I've been to lots of places where they haven't looked at the back page, I don't know, but it's still going to be there and they can see it.
Sorry, just a
when they implement it, and they have.
It's not implemented
It's
yet.
not in.
Right, no, I understand. Both on ACSOL website and your website, there just lists, obviously, the countries.
Correct. We have a matrix we created.
Right. There are lots of countries left out. Like, so say I want to go to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Belarus. None of those countries are listed.
At the moment, what I've done is gotten anecdotal information from people who have traveled, and I've collated that into a matrix. So there's some places like Uzbekistan I have no information on.
Because only people like
Right.
me want to travel.
Yeah. Now right now I know for Kazakhstan, a guy went there for work and he hasn't had any problems.
So there's a gentleman in the back who's been waiting. Sir, in the back, you've been waiting.
Isn't too much emphasis being made on the physical passport? Because can't this flagging be done under database? So when you arrive in another country, they slide your passport through the reader, it comes up.
Right, but the countries have to have agreements and ways to share that database. So, for example, Japan, Canada, United Kingdom, Five Eyes, which are New Zealand. A guy tried to go to New Zealand, he couldn't get out even on the airplane. So New Zealand and Australia, they draw directly from our database, but most other countries don't.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Are there any exceptions if you work through the consulate with a lawyer or any other way if you're working, you get?
Yeah, what my organization now is starting as I get more people is we have a lawyer in Mexico, for example, we've already paid him to start looking at the Guardian Angel program that they have. And there's a statement from the Justice Department there that they will consider some people who can travel. So we are creating a committee for each of the major areas: Asia, Europe, Africa, and Latin America. And my Latin American country, and we want to work with each of the countries individually. That's going to take some work and time to educate them, because what's happening, people get to the border and they don't know how to make out this green notice. They believe, at least they tell us, the immigration officers, that they're being directed to send us back, which is crazy. And it doesn't. One guy lived in China, he's no longer on the registry, he was kicked out, but the Angel Watch Office, all they did was apologize to him. Well, now he's trying to get back to China. So we're going to have to work this country by country. And my objective is we'll have Latin American committee, we'll be working with, Mexico will be important because we want to go there, working with both the Mexican embassy and Mexican immigration. And then I want to start filing complaints with the international organizations, the United Nations Human Rights Organization, the Latin American, the Asian, and also European Court of Human Rights, if that's appropriate. Those will be one avenue. At least we can write complaints. We've already done it for the Latin American Human Rights Court, and for the UN. We haven't gotten any information back yet. And then also work with, I've already visited the Mexican embassy, and they're helping me get in contact with the Justice Department. So maybe we can educate countries and get them to understand that maybe there should be some type of level that can travel.
So I would like to add something. I've already said some less than admirable things about Congressman Smith, so let me add another one. He's also polluting the international environment. So he's part of some international coalition, and he is trying to convince all these other countries to pass laws like ours. And if you read these things, by the way, you can't go to the United Kingdom, okay, even though they wouldn't extradite somebody back to the U.S., thank God. But the fact is, you can't actually enter the United Kingdom right now. Now, there's at least those 26 nations in Europe you can go to, the Schengen nation. I'm Italian, I'm proud to say. Italy says welcome. France, Germany, Spain say welcome. There's 26 nations. I'm sorry?
There's 26 nations
on the Schengen.
Yeah. So you can still travel to those places, but other places, and I would imagine they are laughing at Americans, right? So it's like, let's see, you were an 18-year-old in California and you had sex with a 16-year-old, and why is that a problem? You know, yeah. So it doesn't make sense, folks. It just doesn't make sense. What we're trying to do is we're trying to keep you out of prison because there's a huge potential price to have to pay. 10 years in federal prison if you guess it wrong. Dave, back
Just to comment, someone had mentioned about getting information from the consulate. I'd be very careful about that because I was told by the Scottish consulate here in LA that it should be fine to fly through their airport to Europe. And I then got in touch with the border control at Glasgow, I guess it was Scotland, named the airport, Glasgow or whatever, and got in touch with the head officer there, and he said, no, he said it is entirely up to the border control officer at the airport to decide whether I'm allowed to come through or change planes or anything like that. So don't just listen to what one person tells you, go, oh, it should be fine, because that's what he told me. It was the officer who said, it is entirely up to that one border control officer.
What we're finding is the information we get from the embassies and consulates is almost universally useless because it's up to that person that right there at the immigration. And then they're responding to the green notice and sending people home. So we're going to go through the embassies to get points of contact in country. So that's what I want to build up as we get each of the areas focused. You know, once we do Mexico, I want to communicate with Colombia. I'm working with a woman right now who did something 20 years ago. She's trying to go to a wedding in Colombia. So we're working with paperwork. Now, one thing I do say, the woman, I can't remember her name, but the staffer who helped draft the main IML, and she's been very nice to me, she suggested, and we talked, that you go with a dossier in hand that talks about your offense, that you've already gone through counseling, that you no longer you've done your time in prison, and have that information as much as possible. And try to talk to a lawyer in country if you can, depending on what you're traveling for, and see if they can kind of be prepared when you arrive to talk to that person. Because I've been able to stay in Jamaica because I was prepared. Matter of fact, the woman who interrogated me said when she was 12, she had an affair with a guy who was 30 years old, and he's now old, and she's in his 50s, and she still loves the guy. So she said, have a good time in my country.
Anybody has any experience with dual citizenship and traveling under that?
Yes, yes. That's a great way to travel. A friend of mine is in Florida. He's moving to Canada. They always recommend travel with that passport if you can. Some people are Mexican citizens, some people are Canadians, some people are English citizens. Travel with that passport. Still notify them, but when you get to the other country, just produce your other passport.
And they'll say, welcome home. Did you have a question, ma'am?
Well, I was just going to say, we have someone in Oregon who works for IBM, and he flies all over the world. And IBM has teams of lawyers in every country, and they've managed to get him in, sometimes two.
Is he on the registry?
Oh, yes, he's on the registry.
Could you ask his contact now?
Yeah, I will. But what I need to say is the problem he has is getting back into the United States. They always want to go through his computer, which is an IBM computer. So they don't. But that's his problem. Still, he has gotten into every country if you have enough attorneys.
That's a good idea. That's a very important resource and not one that many people have. Yes, sir.
Is the 21-day advance notification law, is that in the Adam Walsh Act, or is that in the International Natives Law? Where does that come from?
Both, actually.
Yeah, we think both.
So it existed before the International Natives Law.
But the thing is, okay, so the IML is not a standalone law in that what it does, it amends SORNA, or the Adam Walsh Act.
Right.
So that's why it gets so confusing. It's like, well, we're not a SORNA compliant state, so who cares? Well, but you can care because the federal government can come after you. So I do want to talk a little bit about the lawsuit here. I made a reference to it earlier. We did file a lawsuit the day after President Obama signed the bill into law. We were ready, we were poised, and by the way, I tried desperately to persuade other lawyers to file a lawsuit. and nobody else would do it. Did I know that this case we might lose the case? Yes, but it was important to let the federal government know, number one, we're paying attention, and number two, we're mad as hell and we're doing something about it. I give credit to the lawsuit, even though it failed, this lawsuit, to the fact that there are not unique identifiers being added to people's passports. Because they said in the courtroom and in legal documents that this unique identifier would be added in calendar year 2016. And here we are halfway through 2017, and there's not even a regulation out about it. And by the way, as soon as there is, we'll be filing a lawsuit about that, okay? We're sitting here right now trying to figure out our next lawsuit. And, you know, what we want to do is we want to separate these issues. We want to have a lawsuit about notices only, and we want to have another one about the passport identifiers separately. Because we could tell that the judge in the other case got so confused herself that we got the decision that we got. And so we are planning a future lawsuit or two. Please stay tuned. I'm still trying to convince lawyers in other states to file other lawsuits. Wouldn't it be awesome? We thought, wow, can we have 5 or 6 lawsuits filed on the same day? I gave people copies of my complaint. All they have to do is copy the darn thing, right? Find a couple plaintiffs in their own state. I had people from other states in our complaint. And by the way, the new lawsuit will have people from other states as well. You can file still in California because it's convenient for me since I'm in California, right? But we can have people from other states because there's a federal question, so you can have people in other states. But so can the lawyers in the other states. They can even have Californians if they want. Trust me, we have plenty of plaintiffs. And it's even gotten worse, of course. You know, I have one man who's from the state of Michigan, and he lived in Chile. As soon as he got off the parole in Michigan, he moved to Chile. He started a new life there. And so he's gone back and forth to the U.S. and Chile, not a problem. All of a sudden, he went to Chile, and they told him, no, you cannot enter. He owned a horse there. He owned, a business there. He had all kinds of friends and stuff like that. He had an apartment, a lease on an apartment. He hasn't been able to go back to Chile. It's been over a year. Okay, and his offense involved as somebody who was not a minor. And I think that they made a mistake because in Michigan, there's whatever this number is, dash A or not dash A. And they got it wrong. For his offense, I made him produce the documents for me for his offense. His offense did not involve a minor. And yet, this was sent to him, and he's been, it was financially ruined because he couldn't get back to the country. We have another one, potentially, who's from California, who moved to Mexico. He's a photographer, a professional photographer, who takes photos all over the world. He's not being allowed to go back to Mexico City, which is where he has his business, and he owns, a restaurant and some other things as well. He's, on the brink of financial ruin himself because of these crazy laws. So they're wrong. They are wrong. We are going to challenge them again, even if we're tilting at another windmill. We're going to go at it again, probably with at least 2 more lawsuits, because we have to put some reason into these laws. And again, when you think about the passport stuff, think about the historical perspective. No other nation has done this. What if we do this? Who's next, right? With the current president, it seems like Muslims would be next, right? Could it be gays? Could it be, drunk drivers? What is it? I mean, remember, the purpose of this law is supposed to protect people in other countries from our people, right? And supposedly, the IML is focused on child sex trafficking and child sex tourism. Are you going to tell me that a man who relieved himself by the side of the highway and maybe a kid saw it? Okay, even how about somebody who flashes an elementary school? Right? Is he going to engage in child sex trafficking or child sex tourism? Heck no. By the way, the people who are doing these are part of large international cartels. They're not on a sex offender registry. So this terrible law is being passed. It's at least 90 degrees off, and it's ruining people's lives. Like one of my plaintiffs, he comes from Iran. He can't go back to Iran. He's got an elderly father back there. And he says also if his father should die before he gets back to the country, he will not be able to claim his inheritance. Because if they know that he's on the sex offender registry here, he will be killed in Iran if he's allowed to enter the country. He will be killed. And really, folks, is that what we're going to do? Or how about just everyday culture, right? You want to go and see the Greek ruins. I think Greece actually you can go into. Let's just say, let's pick a country, Australia. You really want to go see the kangaroos hopping across the countryside, right? You can't do it at this point in time. Yes, sir.
Did you want to share what the Supreme Court justice said about travel to a Southeast Asian country? I think you mentioned
Justice Alito. Look, so folks, this is, you know, you wonder sometimes how big a hill are we climbing? How big a mountain? This is it. Thank you for that. And that will be my closing statement. So Justice Alito, in public, before the, you know, here on the court, he said, honest to God, the only reason anybody goes to the Philippines is to have sex with children. The only reason. Now, the fact that there were 2 of my plaintiffs who had wives who were adults in the Philippines, I guess he didn't understand that. And somebody else said maybe he was speaking from experience. So.
and this, you know, it ties in with the idea. I mean, if you listen closely to what Emily Horowitz said this morning, there's a real disconnect between law and reason. And, you know, it could be culturally, and there could be a lot of other variables, but law and reason, really. And when you listen to what Emily says, and when you look at what Janice is saying here about this particular justice, and when you read some of these things, this mythology, you see the disconnect. But it's our job to unite together, to bond together, to move together, to defeat this. This is what I call the horrible oppression that gears this whole idea of a sex registry and its progeny. And this IML is part of the progeny.
Thank you, everybody, very much. Thank you.